we were just saying before we actually press record that I feel nervous.
Yeah, I did. I'm feeling a little better now.
Okay. I'm also unsure how to open it.
Okay.
It in a way feels like I'm being the most vulnerable online that I've probably ever been. Yeah, I don't know.
When we were in the park before we came here, we talked about your intention. Like, what was your intention behind doing this podcast today? What was it that you wanted to share, that you wanted people to experience or learn?
Yeah. I think just just as you said, that just landed in the body a little bit more. And I think the intention is just to provide an episode that someone can listen to, and it almost normalizes the process of trauma. And I don't want to say healing because I'm not a huge fan of that. So I think just like returning back home to themselves and authenticity. And just like I was saying in the park, wasn't I, about like feeling that responsibility of having a voice and having a platform and having women and a community in my space and being able to just share like the ups and downs of it. And I think especially because trauma can feel so isolating. And then on the other hand, on social media, trauma in a sense feels so like normalized. So it's kind of like, well, what is the reality of that? Like, what am I stepping into? So just like, hopefully this podcast episode gives people a bit of an insight into that. And also just to know that like we all have our stuff. And I think maybe that's why it feels so vulnerable for me, because there's a part of it that is talking about the protective mechanisms and stuff I've had in place for so long, and maybe how people think they know me or how I've shown up online before is, it's just been very eye-opening.
How do you think you'd like to be received? Like, what would you like to bring and share?
Just like authenticity and honesty. How would I like to be received? Like the word that's coming up is just with like grace. Yeah, because I just feel like there's going to be some things that I talk about that are like super vulnerable, but it's also like a power to be able to step into that and vocalize that, even though it's difficult. So I think just being received as just like a woman just trying to figure her shit out.
Yeah, sounds like a good place to start.
Yeah, I know. How are you feeling?
I feel good. Yeah,
What's your intention?
My intention is to, I guess, kind of like continue to do what I've been doing, which is to kind of like walk alongside you on this path and to support you here in this process of sharing more about you and your experience, and maybe, I don't know, sharing about some of the work that we've done, what it's looked like, what it's involved. Just to, I knew that this was big for you today to kind of come on and share to this degree. And so, I just wanted to, just be here.
Thank you. And you know what's interesting is like just thinking about those protective mechanisms. It didn't feel like it was big until I've sat here. And then I think about the things that I'm going to share. So I think there was probably a part of me that was like, yeah, let's do the podcast. And, you know, like that, so much of our work has been around that, like that mask and that armoring and that like protective part of me. Not that I felt like I needed to protect myself from this, but just how I defaulted into, yeah, it'd be amazing, let's do it. And now I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh shit, this feels really vulnerable. So, and also there's probably a piece around it feeling extra vulnerable because I've just come back from the retreat. So there's like some deep work that's being done. And also I'm sitting in front of someone who sees me, which is another reason why I wanted to do this with you, because you will see and you know the journey. And if I default back into that at any point, it's like, no, I know that's your authentic truth, Lydia. Like, what is it really? So it felt really, even that adds a layer of vulnerability because I'm talking with somebody who has seen the journey and the process. So yeah.
So where would feel good to step in? You know, like what would be a kind of gentle place to land at the beginning of this conversation? Where do you feel drawn to talk to?
You know, I don't actually know.
Okay.
Where do you think is a good place to start?
I think maybe to share a little bit about kind of like how it feels to be you now, like how life is for you at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, just that question makes me like emotional. And I think it's actually not easy to be me at the moment. And there's a level of like choosing that in a way, because it's unlearning so much of all of like the protective mechanisms and the armoring and just everything. Just it's like learning so much about myself to unlearn it. And I think that's been something that's been in our work, is like feeling the least like me I've ever felt, but the most like me as well, and the duality of that. So at the moment, it's I think especially because I've just come back from the breath retreat, it is really difficult actually and really vulnerable. There's a lot to hold. And there's a lot of is fear the right word? Maybe there's a lot of fear.
Fear of what?
I don't know. Just I think fear of like how it's going to make me emotional, but how much things are changing. And how much they like have changed. And almost feeling like I have stepped into, even thinking about the work that I do now and just like the retreat and just so much, like I've stepped into this like path of true authenticity and embodiment. And what it's doing is triggering all of my parts. It's triggering all of my wounds. It's triggering all of the cycles and all of the patterns. And it's consistently having to like ground into what's unfolding in front of me. And it's not easy. But there's also so much amazing stuff. But I think, yeah, I feel like I've blinked and so much has changed.
I'm wondering if it might help people a little bit if you shared a little bit about your experience of like armoring and protective parts. You know, sometimes like we use language that we really understand and we resonate with, and I think it might be really helpful to give people a sense so they could relate to it in their own life and their own experience. So like when you talk about armoring and like protective parts, like what does that mean for you?
Well, protective parts is for sure like the masks that we create or the ways that we go into the world and we protect our vulnerabilities, or we protect the inner child parts of us. Like for me, for example, the biggest thing that I want is just to be loved. So like my protective part, one of the things that I've created is like this hyper independence of, no, I'll do everything. So then there's like this little part of me that wants to be really loved. And then there's this like teenage part of me that feels like she's been let down so many times and has continued to be let down. So then the protective part that comes out as adult Lydia is, now I'll just do everything myself, and I'll just be hyper independent, and I'll create this mask. And it's interesting because it's like you don't know what you don't know. And I think through this work, our work, even work that I do with clients, it's like seeing those parts of yourself can be really uncomfortable because they provide so much safety. And it also like really becomes a part of your identity. So, and I think one of the big things that we've spoken about is how self-love Lydia became an identity that was from a protective part.
Yeah.
And
it was almost defending, wasn't
Yeah.
it? Defending the younger part of you, like
Yeah.
in response or reaction to her fears and insecurities and weaknesses.
Yeah. And also feeling like that thing of being too much, and it's really interesting with like protective parts is because I think sometimes, like for me, for example, that fear that I have of being too much, and like that little part of me really believe in that. And like adult Lydia believe in that. It's like in a sense being self-love Lydia, like I stepped into being not too much, but being really out there and like being so unapologetic and being so authentic and just like really putting myself out there. So it's also interesting to learn about these parts of self, because sometimes your protective part can step into almost that belief that you have of, oh, well, if you think that you're too much, okay, then put yourself out there even more. Sometimes they might cause us to retreat, or, you know, however it comes up for different people. But I think for me, like that whole realization around the self-love Lydia and how I was showing up and all of these different things, not even having a clue that was linked to some of the wounds has been wild for me to realize. Like it's been huge for me to realize, actually. But it's also not a bad thing, which is what I always say to like clients, but also for my personal journey. Like it's not a bad thing because we all do it. It's what makes us human. I think it just becomes hard when you notice it, and then it's like, oh, now you notice it. It's like, well, now what? And then now what for me has been stepping into the vulnerability. And stepping into the alternative of what's an option, rather than putting that mask on and pretending that you've got all your shit together and pretending that you can do everything. Like, what's the option? And the other option is vulnerability, which is like scary.
So it's a choice. It's like you've got a conscious choice to wear a mask or be real.
Yeah.
And how is that? Like, how is it to expose the more vulnerable elements or aspects of yourself?
It's been hard. It's interesting though, because I feel like it is hard, but then it's also like when you find your space and your community and stuff, like it's not hard. Like in our sessions, it's not been hard. But I think because we cultivated so much like safety and trust, and like there was no judgment. And I've always said, I feel like it's just the space that I can land. And I think for me, having that space, that's been a massive driver for me with the work that I do and how I hold space, is like just providing that for people, because we wear masks and we armor up and we protect ourselves so much. To just have that space where you feel like I can be all of me is so unbelievably amazing. And BBTRS, that community that you go into, is straight away you're vulnerable. And you feel like people can sense if you're holding something back, or it's really interesting, but there's just safety. But it's not been easy in other ways. Like, it's not been easy to do this work and then go back into, you know, family dynamics or relationships or work environments, or that's been really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I've not always chose the vulnerability, which is the other thing. Like, I don't want to sit here and be like, yeah, and make out like I always choose the more conscious, embodied, authentic option, because I don't. Because one of my patterns is I collapse into fear. I collapse into sadness. I collapse into, I can't do that, which is what we saw from our session yesterday. What's your experience of what we're talking about?
I think, yeah, like being like needing to protect yourself as a response to trauma is big, and I think something that many people will recognize. You know, I think we have different masks that we really kind of create in a way that feels like natural to us. So we could use like the mask of humor, the mask of intelligence, the mask of anger, the mask of claps, you know, like anything that we do that prevents people from really kind of like meeting our most authentic self. And so it's really interesting to get to meet yourself first, like to even rediscover yourself. So not to mention people that you connect with or that you relate with, but for you to have an opportunity to meet the one underneath the mask. And I think that's a really beautiful part of the journey, because I think many people come into therapeutic spaces and a big thing that they say is like, I just don't know who I am. I don't know why I'm here, what I'm doing. I've just lost myself. And I think it's amazing to have the privilege to witness someone like come home to themselves, their body, their most authentic self, and then to guide them on that path. Because I think it's easy to talk about vulnerability, but the reality of it is really challenging.
Yeah, so challenging.
Because it's messy and it's completely unpredictable. It's alive and raw, and you just don't know where it's going to go.
No, you don't. And I think, you know, you spoke and it always stuck with me, but when you first met me, how confused you were. Yeah. And I love that. Like, it makes me laugh, because even when we done the retreat together, you was like, yeah, I was really confused. And I think that has been nice for you to almost witness that, because you are somebody who's like incredible at this work. So for you to even meet me and be like, oh.
Yeah, I didn't get it. I was like, oh, okay. Self-love Lydia. And I think it was a desire to want to meet the one underneath the mask. And I think the confusion was that you kind of wore it with such confidence.
Yeah.
And it was almost like, oh, I don't know, is this it was challenging. And yet, yeah, there was just there was something like screaming out to be met and known. And so I think the confusion was, maybe like I was confused. Was I projecting something, or, I just couldn't work you out. And I think maybe you'd really mastered the art of showing up in the way that you showed up, and that you'd made a living out of it, and you had a huge Instagram following, and I'd seen all of that stuff, and then I got the opportunity to meet you and co-facilitate on a retreat with you. And my initial I'm imagining before you felt safe enough to kind of let me in and let me meet the one underneath the mask, it was quite a confusing experience.
Yeah.
But then with that, it's been amazing to kind of like, just learn what's required to co-create a container that feels safe enough to be more and more yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I love about this work in general.
Oh, it's amazing.
Is just that opportunity to just meet someone and let them know that genuinely, like, every single part of them is welcome, and that I want to meet all of them, and I'm happy to wait as long as it takes for that to happen.
Yeah.
And to check in around, like, what is it that you really need? Because I think that was one thing that was really interesting initially, was when I asked you, like, if you need support, what could that look like? And it was almost like even that question caused confusion. I was like, I don't know what. It was almost like you wanted a menu.
Yeah.
Like, what can I choose? Like, what is available? What does support even mean or look like? Yeah, so I love that element to it hugely. And I think even like how then masking links into armoring, because you spoke about that too. And like when I think about armoring, I think of the kind of the physical protective elements of the body, of kind of like how we hold tension and how we constrict, control, regulate our own breath, hold tension in our body, which again, like, prevents us from being our most authentic self. And I think like the journey of meeting someone where they're at, meeting the one underneath the underneath the mask, and then supporting them to really like land in their body and own their body. Yeah, it's just, I love it.
I love it
so much.
I'm so grateful. You know what? That's one thing I am grateful for from everything that's happened, like from the trauma, is it's led me to this point. And I feel like I've become such, like when I was on the retreat, I had a moment where I was like, I found my thing. Like, I feel like I was taking that beginner perspective, because I am a beginner. But when you just feel like you're really, really good at something. And for the first time, without the bells and whistles, without the showing up on the Instagram and doing all the things, I'm just like, here we're human beings doing this work is what I'm good at. So that was really beautiful. But I feel like a part of that is also being from having my experience of receiving like BBTRS and like the things that we've explored. And the other thing with, like, when you were talking, then it's really interesting because it's not something that you're consciously aware of when you mask up or you protect yourself after trauma, or even how you like armor up in your body. You're so unaware. So it's like that thing of like, you don't know what you don't know. So for me, who I was and how I was showing up was so authentic to me at the time. And I thought, I've had therapy held, I've done the work, I've been doing mindset work for years, I've done meditation. And what I realized is like, we're layers of an onion. And when you're called to go deeper, then it's your time to go deeper. Or you'll go on that journey. So it's so interesting for me as well to think, like, if you were to ask me a year ago, like, about vulnerabilities and a mask and all of the things that we're talking about, I wouldn't have had the awareness to be able to say. So I think that's something that's really interesting that's come from our journey as well, is to notice things that I wasn't even aware of, because you're not aware of them. And to notice how, like, I hold tension in the body, because I know there's so many people that would look at me and think, she's so in her body, she's so powerful, she's sexy, she's liberal, whatever they might say. She's got loads of self-worth, like all of these different things. And then this year I've been like, oh no. Some of those things sometimes but some of those things also sometimes no. So I think that's a really interesting thing about doing this work as well, especially when you do embodied work, and especially with BBTRS, because of how like deep and how many different things it incorporates. Like, you just see so many different sides of yourself, and at times it's been really overwhelming, because I put on Instagram the other day after the retreat, like, there's space that's being created, but it's like, what do I now put in that space?
Say more about that. When you say space is being created, how?
Just like seeing myself really for the first time, and like integrating a lot of parts of me. And when you release trauma, there's something that, like, sometimes I have moments in sessions, especially on the retreat, and my mind will like pull through for a second and be like, am I making this up?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you pretending?
Mm-hmm.
Because just how the body stores trauma and holds on to it is so, you can read the books and you can learn it and you can do all the things. But when you experience it, it's like, oh my God, like my body's been stuffed full of that for years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in releasing some of that, you create like a spaciousness, but it's like an embodied spaciousness. It's really hard to like articulate it into words. It's like a space that comes and it feels really vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, once you settle into that and once you learn to embrace the vulnerability, which is hard, there's space in the body, there's space in the soul, there's space in the mind, and the space too, instead of it being crammed with like protection or trauma or avoidance or whatever, it's like, oh, I get to choose anew, which is one of the things I kept saying in BBTRS is like, we get to choose anew when we're in that trauma release. So for me, that spaciousness feels like, okay, I get to choose anew, but what is that new?
Mm-hmm.
And on the path to choosing the new, the old parts are coming up to little Lydia might be like, go back to that pattern because it's safe. Teenage Lydia might be like, no, don't do, like, just collapse, just don't do anything. Hide, it's too much. Where adult Lydia is like, no, I want to step into it and I want to take up space and I want to, I want to go out and have loads of impact. So it's like you kind of have to bring those two parts of you along the journey to figure out what has been created when the space comes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm wondering like how, when you spoke about your own experience and you said about like being ready, like there was a sense that you'd done loads of work and then you were kind of ready for like what you described as the deeper work.
Yeah.
What did you need in order to step into deeper work? Like what ingredients did you need to be able to go there, to kind of like maybe meet yourself more fully and to then bring that full, more authentic you into relationship?
You know, it's interesting because I don't know if the trauma that happened in January, I don't know if that would have happened where I would be today.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much like gratitude intertwined with that. And I think my biggest driving force was thinking, I don't want that to define me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the qualities were like safety. You know, you give me so many qualities, but now as I sit here and reflect, I think a lot of them were just me having that trust and just feeling like there's got to be something else than this. There's got to be. And the biggest thing was like not wanting to be defined by what happened. And just being so tired of feeling the way that I was feeling.
Mm-hmm. Which was what?
Unsafe, disembodied.
What did that mean for you to be disembodied? What was the experience kind of walking around, living in life, living in the world, being in relationship, being disembodied? What does that mean to you?
Ignoring what was screaming inside of me.
Okay.
Being in my head so much.
Mm-hmm.
Being on the go all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest things that has changed since doing this work is I've tried to come away from big goals all the time and always needing to do something, always having something to prove. And so I think in a way now when I reflect back, being disembodied was the mindset stuff, being so deep in the mindset stuff, being constantly feeling like there's this and then there's this and then there's this that I have to strive and work for. So that for me feels like now I know this work, that feels like it was being disembodied.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the mindset work has a place for sure, but I think this work is just so unbelievably profound. I think also like being disembodied, just like not being able to vocalize my needs, not knowing what I need and not being able to vocalize that, not being able to set boundaries.
Did you trust your body? Like, was it something that like felt like an ally or a friend, or was it like, what was your, like when you thought about it, or did you not think about it so much? It was
Didn't
just
go that deep into it to think about it.
Yeah.
I think I thought about it in the sense of like body image and intuition, being able to tune into those things. But also what's really interesting is that selective hearing of intuition, of like, if it was coming up and telling me something, if it felt really unsafe to follow that, then I wouldn't follow it. So it's also how selective I could have been and chose to be. And again, that none of this is conscious. And I think it was never like, you don't know what you don't know. And nobody ever taught me about truly trusting your body, like what that means and how powerful it is when you live life through your body and all of the amazing things that come from that. So it wasn't even a thought. I think now when I reflect back, it feels like when we speak about that armor, and something for me is like the chest, like the heart being like not letting people in. And how I like visualize that is almost like living life behind a wall. And I would be there, but I was on standby mode, which again is what we spoke about. Like, I'm in my life, but I'm on standby mode. I'm not authentically me. I'm not, there's fear coming up all the time. There's just not knowing what to do, not knowing how to use my voice, just being tired, just like
surviving.
Yeah. And I still, like, again, I still default back into that. But now I'm aware of it and I try as much as I can to choose the new and to give myself what I need. And I think just understanding it from like a nervous system level as well is like, okay, what do I need in this moment to nourish me and bring me back into connection? And I think it requires showing up for yourself a lot. A lot, which is hard.
What does that mean to you, to show up?
To tune in and notice what you need and then step into that. Which in the element of trauma is not easy because everything is geared towards safety.
Yeah.
And even if that thing logically is so unsafe for you, that driving force to run towards it is so powerful. So sometimes it can be like running into a wall a million times and you get knocked back down, but then you decide to run back into the wall again. But one time you might not run back into the wall. And then it's like, oh, okay, I didn't do that. That's really good. And I think it's about creating new patterns of safety and being able to just really be authentic in what I need and I desire, which again is not easy. And it's really not easy when like processing trauma.
I'm wondering what you would really love to sort of share to women specifically, because I know like most of your following are female.
Yeah.
That what you would love to share with them about your journey, you know, like so that they could feel less alone in their own experience, in their own body. Like what would be some of the key things that you'd love people to hear, like from your learnings and your journey and your experience?
I think one of the main ones is that there's like hope after trauma. I think especially for me as well, because when what happened in January happened, like there had to be a hope to get me to consistently show up and do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Because I noticed as the weeks went by, it started to feel more distant, like what happened. And I could have, it could have just, I get why people go, oh, it's not, but like it doesn't impact me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they get to the point where they realize it's impacted them, because you just then build yourself up back up around that trauma. You
Mm-hmm.
build everything that we spoke about. And knowing that, like, in that hope, it's that it doesn't define you.
Mm-hmm.
And also the other thing is, like, if you experience trauma, or you know that you have experienced trauma, like, step into support and community.
Do you think that there's a lack of clarity around trauma? And it's a big word, isn't it?
It is a big word, yeah. And we were speaking about that before. It's such a big word, but it's also a word that now, if you go onto social media, like, it's so common.
Mm-hmm.
And this journey has been so beautiful for me, because, like we've said, I can study it and I can read the books and I can help other people with it. But now I know what it means to leave your body.
Mm-hmm.
I know what that means. I know what it means and what it feels like to feel so unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
I know what the pain feels like of it, but also the pleasure that comes in to pull back into old patterns, to pull back into protective mechanisms. Like, trauma it's a felt experience.
Mm-hmm.
It in some ways is so isolating. I think especially after experiencing the sessions and the work that I've experienced, like, it feels really isolating to carry that and be like, oh wow, there's a huge impact.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I've found, like, it makes you so vulnerable. And, you know, just even the experience that I had in BBTRS, to, like, be that flooded with trauma that you literally pass out. I'm just like, what? That is wild for me. And how hard it is to choose anew.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not easy. And even with all the support around me, even with Nasaga there, even in the safety of BBTRS, to choose that new is, oh my God, it's so hard. But it's so beautiful, because then you get the rewards of choosing the spaciousness and the authenticity and everything that we've spoken about. But I definitely feel like, I think when we think about sexual trauma as well, I think we can associate it with the big things.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've realized is sexual trauma can arise even if there was consent, even if it was in a loving relationship, even if it was a one-night stand. Like, however we have sex as women and we step into, like, connection, it has the potential to result in trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything does, obviously, and not everybody will experience the same level of trauma, which is something we've spoken about. But for sure, it's like there's not really an understanding of it.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I feel like it's really interesting, because I've now, when things happen in sessions with clients, I get it because I've experienced it. And yeah, it's also scary to, like, leave your body.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's so scary. It's so scary to be that vulnerable. It's I think the other thing as well is, like, healing trauma will bring different levels of and different processes. Like, at first I couldn't feel any emotions, like, they just shut down completely. And then when I completed what was underneath the freeze that time, when I went away and I spoke to you about it, and I got the opportunity to, like, for the body to complete what it wanted to do, since then there's been no desire, no sensation, no, like, I'm on a whole other journey now with my sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can have this thing, and just anybody listening to it is like, if you push against that, it's like abandoning self.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where like the choices come in. Like you have a choice, and as hard as it might be to like walk through that path of healing your trauma or returning back home to yourself with compassion and grace and empathy and love and all of those different things, like it's going to benefit you so much more than just pushing off against that.
Yeah.
You know, like as we were saying before, if there's a numbness or if you've experienced sexual trauma and you don't really get pleasure and you outsource that to other people, just consistently showing up with like that masculine and like, well, we'll just keep going and it is what it is. And it's like there's really a time to just honor all of yourself and meet yourself where you are. And it's not easy, as I keep saying, but it's also beautiful, because what's the alternative? The alternative is just for me to go, oh, well, that is what it is. And then like not to have a relationship with my body and my intimacy and my sexuality and my pleasure. And also it's learning me so many different ways of like, and we spoke about this in our session, to be with the energy of sexuality without it resulting in just an orgasm. And me being able to tune into that and work with that in other different ways. And that's been so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm hearing you say is that like this experience or this series of experiences has kind of like brought you to a place where you are getting to really meet yourself on so many new levels, but like to truly like inhabit your own body and your own experiences and be here, like learn how to kind of be in your body and be in relationship and actually feeling into presence rather than just kind of like thinking that you understand the word.
Yeah.
Feels like kind of trauma is, or your journey with trauma has kind of like brought you like full circle kind of back to a much more authentic version of yourself.
Yeah. And definitely much more embodied. What have been some of the key like standout pieces of our work in relation to trauma healing that you've facilitated and seen me go through?
I think the first one is just obviously like the co-creation of safety or not of a safer space. So that's always kind of like the first stage, is like, how can we co-create a space that feels safe enough for you to be more honest, more authentic, more vulnerable. So that was kind of like how we progressed from like the confusion towards the okay, here she is.
Yeah.
You know, like what do we need to do? And I think that's probably the biggest step in any therapeutic journey, is to work with someone where you just feel that way. You feel like there's a sense of trust and safety.
Yeah.
And that if that isn't present, it's absolutely okay to find someone else. You know, like that's just a really important thing that I think isn't really discussed enough in therapy. Like we focus a lot on the different modalities or the qualifications, but we don't focus enough on how does it feel to be with this person. Like what energetically, like do I trust them? Do I feel safe? So I think the first stage was like, let's co-create a space that feels safer. Let's build the relationship so that you can remove your mask. And then at the same time, let's build resilience within you. So teaching you how to breathe properly, which helps you to be more grounded and centered and stay present when we are doing the work. Because there's no point going straight into kind of deep processing work if you're disassociated and disconnected from your body because you're not breathing.
No.
So then we kind of like gently bring in an awareness of your body and your breath. And that felt really integral and important. It empowered you to the point where when sometimes things felt really big, that you could kind of hold on to yourself.
Yeah, I'll never forget that session where it come up from like my spine when we were doing the unwinding and being able to like hold both. And I remember you saying to me like, stand in it, like you've got it. And that felt so like powerful after it. Yeah, so that's a really amazing part of the work, because when you can hold it, you don't get like flooded and overwhelmed by it so much, and then you're able to like stay present with it. And that's so like so crucial when it
Yeah.
comes to healing trauma, I think.
Yeah, the ability to stay present and in your body is everything.
Not go into catharsis and leave.
No. Or even to start talking about the story and really going too deeply into it until you're able to actually connect with your own physical body.
Yeah.
And that's massive. So we spent quite a lot of time doing that. And then we used breath, we used movement, we used sound, we used touch, we use, I guess, a more somatic psychotherapy. And all that means is a psychotherapy where we bring the body in as much as possible.
Yeah.
So we keep checking in, like, what are you noticing? What's happening right now? So like if we would talk about something and I would notice you would drift away somewhere, that I would check in with you and support you to kind of come back again. And then I think then it's just a very kind of like organic, trusting process that like when you have that, you have those things in place. So you have the skill set to support yourself. You have an awareness of your own breath, of your own body, boundaries, like, that all of my work is invitational.
Yeah.
That you could say, no, I'm not doing it. And it's like, it's completely honored that whilst there's an invitation to maybe explore things that feel challenging, everything is on your terms.
Yeah.
And that we go slowly and gently. So we kind of take the complete opposite effect of receiving trauma, which is too much, too fast, too soon. We just go slowly and gently at your pace. And then we kind of just trust the process. We show up and speak and it just goes somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's down to your commitment to this work, that you have repeatedly shown up week by week, doing what it is that you need to do.
Yeah.
And so you have consciously turned into yourself, into your own pain, into your stories, into your shadow. And you've invited me to kind of sit alongside you while you've done that.
Yeah.
And that's huge. I think so much of the suffering we experienced when we were younger, we suffered alone.
Yeah.
Not in connection, with no one to talk to, no one to share with, no one to tell us it's okay or to support, to de-shame us even. Just more like we just did it on our own. And I think that's a really, really integral part. And I think that I feel like if you have a sense of safety and you have relationship, I think everything else is a bonus.
Yeah, me too. And just that connection. And to be able to step into that, even if there's some like shameful parts. I think like one of the biggest things that we spoke about yesterday in our session was how I've realised my just like lack of self-worth, which is just so like, I feel emotional even saying that, but just to be able to like look at somebody in the eyes and say, wow, I've realised I actually feel so worthless. And those narratives that come from trauma of I feel so broken. And just like, what's wrong with me? Because of like the shame or the confusion around that can definitely for sure make me want to pull out of connection. And make me almost want to isolate with those things. But I think stepping into that and being able to step into like a safe space and just say like, this is how a part of me feels. This is not all of me. And this is what I also say with clients, like, it's a part of you that's online now. It's not all of you. But that's really hard. It's really, really hard as well to be seen in. I think when you've experienced trauma, there's such a vulnerability. And just to have
a
that
vulnerability
space.
in kind of exposing and bringing up your experience and sharing it. And
to just be in like the pain of that. And to be in the release of that as well. Like when your whole body is trembling and you're just... And there's something about, the experiences I've had where I've disassociated to not even be in my body And to be in the room with you is so vulnerable because I'm not even there really.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that comes because of the pain. So there's no empowered spin I can put on that. There's no mask I can put to kind of default away from that. That is the most vulnerable I'm ever going to be seen with others, but also with self. So to kind of come out of that and then to like process that and integrate that, it's like, oh shit, that level of vulnerability is like.
What did it teach you?
It taught me that there's people that can hold me in that.
Mm-hmm.
It taught me and it showed me the impact of experiences. You can't deny what your body does.
Mm-hmm.
You can't deny it. It showed me how hard I've worked to mask that and protect from that.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the reality of what was in the body. And it's taught me like the power and almost the essentialness of being able to listen to my body.
Mm-hmm.
And that I can come back from that. Like I can have that experience and I can go and I can feel really vulnerable, but then I can also integrate that. Like I can do both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How is your relationship with your body now? Like, how is it to live in your body right now?
You know, it ebb and flows because like yesterday, obviously coming into session, I was just completely overwhelmed. This morning, I've done some really nice shaking and unwinding, so I feel a bit more in my body now.
Mm-hmm.
But to be in my body is like such a gift. Like just the change it makes, I think for me as well, because I was just always told I was too much and I was too deep and I'm too emotional. And to now just to know how much of a gift that is.
Mm-hmm.
And to be okay and to know that it's not too much. It's just who I am. And the more that I get into my body and the more embodied I am. Yeah, there's the pain that you feel or the dysregulation or all of those things, but there's also the pleasure and the joy and the safety and the knowing and the tools and just like even to be in ecstatic dances with women and just feel like I'm not holding back and I'm just in my body and I can release. Like it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And it's made me way more authentic than quote unquote self-love Lydia ever was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's amazing. It's so amazing. And God knows where I'll be in another 6 months, especially now I'm starting the breath training. But yeah, it's amazing to be in my body. And I think every single person deserves that.
Mm-hmm.
Like every human being deserves to just feel, live in their life, not live alongside their life or run alongside their life, like to live in it and have moments of presence and connection and safety and just like the ability to like meet your own needs. And to tend to like little Lydia and teenage Lydia. And yeah, sure, like there's a big realization now around the lack of self-worth. But instead of that defining me again, I'm like, okay, our work will now be like what needs to happen in order for me to tend to those little wounded parts and make them feel like they are deserving. Yeah. How do you find living life in your body?
I feel really, really grateful for my relationship with my body. I mean, obviously, like it comes with challenges.
Yeah, it's not
like
easy.
to be like really acutely aware of myself is, I don't know, like I'm naturally quite a sensitive person, so I feel a lot. And so sometimes it's a lot to feel things.
Yeah.
But I feel like my body's my best friend, and that's a real gift, and that it's an ally.
Yeah.
And so that it supports me to really be in the world. And I think for a long time in my life, I absolutely wasn't in the world. I was in my head. I was controlling everything. I was afraid, and learning how to like really land in my own body helped me exponentially, like more than anything I could ever describe. And so, yeah, I love the sensitivity and the challenges and like it's so interesting to observe it. And I think that the better I get at observing how it is to be me in my body, the less stuck I get.
Yeah.
So like, I think historically I would notice something and then completely leave it. It's like, oh, that feels horrible. I don't want to. And then I would try and ignore it or deny it. And really it would just kind of fester and get bigger and louder until I gave it space. So I love being in my body. I'm incredibly grateful for it. And it just teaches me. I think it just teaches me about kind of like the unpredictable nature of life. It's like we're messy, unpredictable animals, beings, and the more we embrace that, then I think the more connected we get to be. Because that's just, it kind of circles back to the mask thing.
Yeah.
It's like when we embrace our messiness, then life is just completely here and completely available.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for really trusting me and allowing me to walk alongside you.
Yeah. And I hope this podcast episode resonates with someone.
Me too.
I'm sure it will.